Hi, everybody. Welcome to Monday. It's great to have you here. What a bombshell. If you've been waiting on those Epstein tapes to drop, don't worry about it. I got something else for you that might be just as good. One of the victims, proven victims, has dropped a big book. Actually, it's dropping tomorrow, but we got some information on the advanced copy. That's Virginia Giuffre. You've probably heard of her as the most vocal, outspoken Epstein victim. You've probably heard of her as the one who's been in a pitched battle against Prince Andrew, saying, yeah, I was trafficked to that guy. I have the photo to prove it. There's me, Prince Andrew. I'm 17. Where is his hand? It's on my midriff, my bare midriff. And behind me, yeah, that's Ghislaine Maxwell. So the proof was in that pudding photo, shall we say. Well, now she's got a lot more to say. And you might be saying to me, what I don't understand. She took her own life months ago. You're right. But she had a memoir, and it's dropping. So is she naming names? And what is she saying about the things that happened to her in Jeffrey Epstein's care? That's all coming with a lawyer for one of the victims in just a moment. Also, every so often, a file drops from the Idaho murder case. The gag order was almost three years old, right? So it stands to reason it's going to take a long time for us to get the information from the Bryan Kohberger slaughters in Idaho. And as each new piece of information drops, it's something the families also learn while you and I learn about what happened to their kids. And one of the victim's sisters, who I know you know, Kaylee Goncalves, based on that epic burn she gave Bryan Kohberger at his sentencing, she's learning more. And she got a face-to-face with the prosecutors, and they told her some things. Tonight, she's telling us some things, specifically about the wounds to her sister's hands. How many were actually defensive, and how many of them were, quote, unquote, experimental? I know. I had questions about that word, too. We're going to get to that in just a moment. And also, how did you spend your weekend? What did you binge? If you were like me, you were binging the new Wayne Gacy docudrama on Peacock. If you didn't, put it in your calendar. It is awesome. And I'm not alone. It turns out I'm one of the people that helped Peacock score a record with this docudrama. The reason I liked it so much is that it taught me a lot about Gacy that I didn't know. Like, I didn't know what a good guy he could appear to be. I didn't know what an every guy Chicago guy he could appear to be. I didn't know how many friends he had in high places because of how he behaved. And it taught me a lot about how he lured his victims. If you've been watching the docudrama, tonight I got something special, the real audio tapes that his lawyer recorded. You probably saw Bob Motta was the lawyer who was hired to defend this guy, one of only two who would do it. Well, Bob Motta's son has all the tapes, and he's remastered them, and they're clear as a bell. He's going to join me tonight, and we're playing tapes, so don't go anywhere. Let me start here, though. You can bury a scandal. You can bury evidence. You can even bury accusations, and you can bury accusers, too. But you cannot bury the truth. Not forever. Which is not to say that every single word in the tell-all that is dropping tomorrow from Virginia Giuffre is gospel. We don't know that. But we do know that 6 months after Virginia died by suicide at the age of 41, she is getting the final word in a cruel and revolting scandal that sucked her in when she was still in her mid-teens, and it really never entirely let her go.
I was recruited at a very young age from Mar-a-Lago and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day, and I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice.
That was Virginia Giuffre back in 2019, the same year that her infamous rapist and trafficker Jeffrey Epstein was found hanging in his New York jail cell. And the same year that Britain's Prince Andrew, to whom Epstein allegedly trafficked her at age 17, hello photo, was handed his first public rebuke, but not his last. As we reported on Friday, the prince is now giving up all of his royal titles, including Duke of York, and there's no indication that that was his decision alone. Speaking of titles, Virginia's memoir is called Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. And though, again, it doesn't drop till tomorrow, what we have seen so far is both sinister and devastating. Virginia describes being a plaything of Epstein and his now imprisoned right-hand woman, Ghislaine Maxwell. She writes this: "In my years with them, they lent me out to scores of wealthy, powerful people. I was habitually used and humiliated, and in some circumstances, choked, beaten, and bloodied. I believed I might die a sex slave." That's according to the BBC, because they got an advance copy of Virginia Giuffre's book. Giuffre wrote that she was forced to have sex with Andrew, the once favorite son of the late Queen Elizabeth, 3 different times. The first when she was just 17. She writes that Andrew acted, and I quote, "entitled, as if having sex with me was his birthright." She says Epstein paid her $15,000 for that encounter. She writes another encounter was on Epstein's private island as part of an orgy. And she writes this: "Epstein, Andy, and approximately 8 other young girls and I had sex together. The other girls all appeared to be under the age of 18 and didn't really speak English. Epstein laughed about how they couldn't really communicate, saying they're the easiest girls to get along with." Days later, she writes she lost a pregnancy. She says she woke up in a pool of blood as Epstein was taking her to the hospital and whispering to a medic about her care. She writes this: "I had a tiny incision near my belly button, which was consistent with a laparoscopic keyhole surgery for an ectopic pregnancy. But Epstein told me that I'd had a miscarriage, which is something altogether different. The one thing I clearly remember is that at one point a doctor told me I might never be able to have children." In fact, in later life, Giuffre did have 3 children of her own. In the book, she adds, and I quote, "Epstein never wore a condom, and neither did the men that he and Maxwell trafficked me to." But there is no suggestion that Prince Andrew may have fathered the child that she says that she lost in this book. In 2021, as you probably know, Virginia Giuffre sued Prince Andrew, the man that she called Andy. And though he vehemently denied wrongdoing and still does, he settled the following year for a reported £12 million, which works out to roughly $16 million US. In the book, Giuffre says the settlement included a gag order, which may or may not be null and void now, being that she's dead. But we don't know for sure, because sometimes an estate is still bound by it. She also writes in her memoir, quote, "After casting doubt on my credibility for so long, Prince Andrew's team had even gone so far as to try to hire internet trolls to hassle me. But if the prince actually did that, he may have not stopped there. As we speak, London police are said to be, quote, actively investigating reports that the prince asked his personal bodyguard to dig up Virginia's personal information, including her social security number, shortly before that infamous photo of the 2 of them surfaced in 2011. I'm joined now by a criminal defense attorney who has represented several of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers. Josh Giuffre is also a friend of the program. Josh, it's good to have you back. This is a lot to sort of take in. A, the allegations, right, in the book, but B, the fact that they are coming from beyond the graves. So the first question I have, and I have many, but the first one is your initial thoughts on the information that she's writing in this advanced copy of the book.
Well, it was clearly planned, and this is something that she intentionally set out to do. As we understand, this book deal was made with a couple of different publishers, eventually ending up at Knopf, and there was a 7-figure advance involved. And this was all completed with her ghostwriter just a brief time before her untimely death via suicide. So this set of information this telling of her story was definitely something she was in charge of. She played an intimate role being the primary source and worked hard to make sure that her story gets out there, because that's really the victory for her and the other victims of Jeffrey Epstein and all these other men. It's being able to come out and see accountability.
Well, so it's easy to forget or get confused or confuse all of the litigation in the Jeffrey Epstein criminal and civil cases. There are myriad. But with Giuffre, you know, she was bound by non-disclosure agreements with the prince, and it seems that she was bound by a non-disclosure agreement at some point, possibly with other powerful men in the United States. I know Alan Dershowitz sued her for defamation, and they went back and forth. So how does the NDA or plural NDAs, factor into dying and having a publisher take your memoir forward?
It really is an interesting legal case because, you know, now that she's passed, what is the defamation? Is she able to defame or libel or slander someone, including all of these individuals referenced, not by name, but certainly there's a lot of information out there in this book as clear abusers. What kind of legal liability is out there? Well, she's going to have an estate, and that estate will generate funds. We've got this book deal. We've got whatever else she had poured into that estate, and that estate will be legally responsible, or the legal organ, if there are lawsuits against it for this publishing. But that's clearly going to protect the rest of the family and the takers. Limiting the liability is probably something she planned extensively regarding.
Well, I would assume that she was no stranger to the law and to civil litigation. And David Boies, who's pictured beside her there, is one of the most incredible attorneys in American history. He argued Bush v. Gore back in 2000. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing. So if she bequeathed her entire estate to someone, and that is done and said and over, can someone who feels like a non-disclosure agreement has been violated come after those parties because they never signed anything?
It would be going against the estate, and whether that non-disclosure carries on and is a continuing obligation of the estate, and whether it was violated.
But if the estate's settled, that's what I mean. Like, I get it if the estate's still in play, but if the estate is settled and paid out and it's closed and over, does the non-disclosure attach to other people who had nothing to do with it?
It depends on how that non-disclosure was drafted, because if it's meant to survive the death of the individual or is attached to certain writings or other assets of that estate, the inheritor of those assets then get everything. You get the liabilities as well as the benefits.
Wow. Okay, so the other question I have for you is, let's just say things in this book may be a violation of the NDA. That would require Prince Andrew to come after kids, right? Like, wouldn't that require him to do something that the optics of which would be so horrendous? It's almost a given. Ain't no way, no how he's coming after her or her kids.
It's the awkwardness of anything like this, or a blackmail or something like that. Eventually, the truth comes out, and you're going to admit, yes, I knew her. Yes, these are issues. Remember, Prince Andrew has been on the record multiple times denying these stories up, down, left, right, and center, and appears to be going down with the ship. All of the British press is completely up in arms regarding the story of him losing his titles that you reported on, and how that may have been connected to this upcoming release. And this release is going to continue being just a giant ball of wax. It grows and grows and grows, grabbing in more people. This story is going to continue roiling the British aristocracy and royalty for decades to come.
So let me ask you this, Josh. Virginia wrote in her book that she was, quote unquote, lent out to scores of wealthy and powerful men. And so the natural thing to do would be to turn the page and find out who they were. And at this point, she didn't name them. Can you explain to me why that would be if she's dead and isn't concerned about, you know, violating an NDA?
It wouldn't necessarily not be concerned, but if they're going to violate an NDA, may as well swing for the fences on the big stuff. The smaller individuals who might not have had as strong a claim, why mess around with a bunch of smaller suits naming these individuals when really we all know the internet is going to go nuts on these individuals. You can track when, where, what, why Brian or Jeffrey Epstein was donating money to these organizations. He was in the PR materials from these universities. It won't take very long to figure out who some of these alleged academics were, and there are going to be big questions at these institutions and to these people individually.
Let me ask you this. My assumption was that the publisher was concerned about a defamation. I mean, if the people she's saying are as wealthy and as powerful as Epstein was, and methinks they were just by the manifests of the plane, right, the Lolita Express, then, you know, the publisher could be liable, and these people have massive hammers. So is it possible that Virginia gave them a manuscript that was rife with names? They excised the names out, but somewhere out there, there is a manuscript that is raw and searing and terrifying, and it could leak?
That is the golden question. Is in the world of publishing, this isn't the first draft. This isn't the second draft. This is the 50th draft. It's been put through the fact checkers, and the lawyers at big publishers, they have lots of work making sure that anything they publish is as bulletproof as possible. So I know with the quality of publishing going on in this case and the people involved, this was given extraordinary scrutiny, and considerations about exposure were definitely part of that conversation. I don't expect necessarily big public action until maybe some more people get named, maybe some more people's secrets are exposed, which it's almost like a present from her posthumously, where she has pointed people in the direction for accountability.
At the very least, you know, I can't say for sure what allegations of hers are accurate or not accurate, but that photograph of her as a 17-year-old girl with a bare midriff and the prince's hand on it. Our banner is over that. If we could just drop the banner for a second so everybody can see where the prince's hand is. If that's not your niece, that hand should be nowhere near that. And that smiling Ghislaine Maxwell in the background, you know, a convicted rapist. That picture is just worth 1,000 words.
Absolutely.
Josh, I wanted to say,
Sorry. Every single.
I was just going to say. Go ahead.
Every single father in America sees that and feels the same way you're describing. There's just something natural.
I think you're right.
It's third rail.
There's something disgusting.
Yeah.
Yep. Josh Giuffre, thank you. I'm sorry about the crosstalk there. We have a delay, and so you and I are talking over each other. We weren't trying to be rude to each other, but thank you for coming on as always. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too. And folks, I'm going to tell you something about that question that I just asked Josh about whether out there somewhere a manuscript is floating around with all the names not cut out. Tomorrow on this program, I'm going to be talking with Amy Wallace. Who is Amy Wallace, you say? She's the co-author of Virginia's book, Nobody's Girl. So I got a lot of questions for her, like, what did the original manuscript say before the editors got to it? And is it out there somewhere for one day, you know, perhaps an unearthing? So that's coming tomorrow. Do not miss this program, Tuesday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Folks, they say that you never really find closure after you lose a loved one to violence. And boy, are they ever right, whoever they are. Take Olivia Goncalves, for instance, sister of Idaho murder victim Kaylee Goncalves. Her epic burn of Bryan Kohberger at sentencing is one for the history books. Google it if you didn't see it. But she's not done looking for answers about what happened at 1122 King Road, and what she just learned from prosecutors that we'd never heard before is coming up next. One of the most unforgettable moments from the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger back in July was the takedown that was delivered in open court by Kaylee Goncalves' big sister, Olivia. And frankly, a more fitting description of her victim's impact statement was a master class in the searing burn. So I was not altogether shocked to learn that months later, with the Idaho student murder case officially closed and Kohberger locked up tight in the maximum security in Idaho, Olivia Goncalves is not still satisfied, not completely. The other day, she was finally able to sit down face to face with the man who her family relied on all throughout this case to give them justice. Justice for her family and justice for 3 other victims' families, too. She put 2.5 years worth of questions to the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson, as well as other investigators who joined the meeting. And then she talked about what she learned with my colleague, Brian Entin, who's going to join me in just a moment. But first, I want to show you part of a video that Olivia posted on how her sister suffered and how her killer may have reveled in it. The court still hasn't released the victims' autopsy reports, but we did just get a list of exhibits that the state planned to use if Kohberger had gone to trial. It includes 26 separate photographs of wounds that Kaylee Goncalves endured. And Olivia says that she's been told some of those wounds that appeared to be defensive may not have been defensive. Instead, they could have been, as she puts it, experimental. Take a look. And with that, I want to bring in my colleague, Brian Entin. Brian, you talked to Olivia, and I'm sure you guys went into depth about that TikTok post. I'm still slightly unclear about what experimental means and how she learned or heard that term.
Yeah, so it seems this is something, Ashleigh, that she was told when she had this meeting with the prosecutor, with Bill Thompson, and also with law enforcement. And she went by herself, by the way. It's something she wanted to do by herself. So, you know, she lives in California. She flew to Idaho, and she went by herself to sit at a table with all of them and get her questions answered. A lot of them still don't have answers just because, you know, we don't know the motive. There's a lot that the prosecutor just doesn't know. But there, you know, she did get a full list of wounds. And I think the presumption initially was that that a lot of these wounds came because Kaylee was fighting back against Bryan Kohberger. And it seems now that may not be the case. Some of the wounds, and it's sort of just like disgusting to talk about, but when she says experimental, some of these wounds may have been Bryan Kohberger just, you know, stabbing in places and just almost like experimenting in a way, and some even after Kaylee was already dead.
So basically just sadism, just a sick person doing even sicker things after he had done the sickest thing. And that was just, but I'm curious about the amount of time that he had in the house. You know, it's like, I think it's hard to know exactly when he opened the door. All we know are the accounts of when they heard things in the house and when he was driving out of the neighborhood. But it's, you know, it's roughly about 20 minutes. Was there even enough time for him to, and I hate to use the word, but it would be his sadistic description, play with his victims and do those things after he killed them?
Yeah, it seems there would be. I mean, you know, we, like you said, we don't know the exact time frame, but we know that he was in the house between roughly 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Granted, we don't know how long it took for him to get in and out and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it seems there would be enough time for him to do that. And it's pretty disturbing to think about.
So in the face-to-face meeting that Olivia had with the prosecutor, man, this is a long time coming, right? There's just been so much they've wanted to know, and they've been left in the dark with you know, the rest of us, and it just feels so unfair to victims. I understand why, but did she come away with the meeting, from the meeting with the prosecutors with a better understanding of their process or who they are or what they were doing? Because there was a lot of acrimony there for a long time.
Yes, she did. And I think they almost sort of came to terms with each other. At least for her, I think she left with more respect for the prosecutor. Of course, she still doesn't agree with the plea deal, and her family has been very outspoken about being upset with a lot of things along the way when it comes to how the state handled the case. But I think I know she left with more respect for them, sort of a mutual understanding. And it's interesting, Ashleigh, she said that when she went to this meeting, you know, she was sort of didn't know whether or not she wanted to see some of these autopsy photos for herself. And she said can you ensure to me that none of these photos will leak? And they basically said no, and that they think there is a leaker, which is what she told me. And so her feeling was, well, if there's any possibility that the photos could leak, I want to see at least some of them for myself so that I'm not shocked. And so she did that.
Wow, I can't even imagine what that would be like and how she'll recover from that, because you can never unsee those things. And God forbid they do leak. We've made a conscious decision on this show to be extraordinarily sensitive about these very painful photographs. There's no journalistic, reason for showing them. He is guilty and gone. This doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't answer any more questions. One thing I was just shocked, though, to see Bryan Kohberger's attorneys were filing some battle about the restitution. They're mad that he's got to pay somewhere between $250,000 and probably $260,000 or $70,000 in restitution. This is one of the orders. What the hell is that about?
Yeah, I don't know about you, Ashley, but this just sort of got under my skin a little bit. Like, I felt like this, he admitted to the crimes, he's in prison. I felt like this was almost just like a dagger into the victims, like one final time, because basically they filed this detailed motion, named the families in the motion, and were basically saying, look, there's been GoFundMes, and we don't believe that Bryan Kohberger should be responsible for paying some of these costs that have come up that were not explicitly named in the plea deal. Granted, he doesn't really have any money, so I think this is sort of a moot point. And that's the reason that I found it to be so upsetting. Like, why even file this after everything's done? Put the names in there, call out specific families. Why do that now? I just felt like, I don't know. It just felt kind of mean to me.
Tasteless. Yeah, callous, tasteless, cold, classless, you name it, crass. To suggest the idea is, it's not that I can't afford paying it, it's just that you don't need it because there's GoFundMes. I can't even, and I don't know what lawyer would sign their name to that, honestly, but yeah. You know what? The law works in mysterious ways. Brian Entin, thanks so much for bringing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ash.
As always, my favorite reporter out there. Okay, coming up next, if you binged the new Gacy docudrama over the weekend, congratulations. You and I helped to set a record on Peacock. This is a gripping account that shows a whole other side of this maniacal serial killer. And it answers a question. How was he able to lure so many victims to their deaths? We have the actual real-life Gacy tapes after the break. What his lawyer, Bob Motta, recorded. Because Bob Motta Jr. is live with me next.
I gotta set the record straight. I killed so many.
We have a search warrant for John Wayne Gacy's house. He is in custody.
I would like to cooperate with you boys. Help out in any way that I can. There's really 4 Gacys. John the contractor, John the politician, John the clown, and then there's the other guy.
Let's face it. If bloodthirsty serial killers looked and acted like bloodthirsty serial killers, they'd have a pretty tough time finding their victims. But as that clip you just saw implies, John Wayne Gacy didn't have that problem. Far from it, in fact. The clip was from the new scripted drama that is topping the charts on Peacock. It's called Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. And don't get confused, there is also a documentary called John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. So you got to have the Devil in Disguise in the front of the title if you want to get the docudrama. And while the devil part has been in the spotlight for decades, it's the disguise that's the real eye-opener for me, and I think a lot of other people too. And I don't mean Gacy's clown makeup, though that is part of it. I mean his absolute Jekyll and Hyde personality. To most of his fellow Chicagoans, he was a stand-up guy. But to the young men and boys that Gacy preyed on, he was a soulless demon, Between 1972 and 1978, John Wayne Gacy kidnapped, bound, raped, and murdered at least 33 victims and buried most of them under his floorboards at his house. He was executed for those crimes in 1994. And my next guest knows all of John Wayne Gacy's personalities as well as anybody alive. His father defended Gacy when no other lawyer would and recorded their pretrial conversations, several of which we have played on this program before. But guess what? Now those tapes have been digitally remastered. And sure enough, they capture Gacy, the good old guy, Mr. Chicago, who could easily have fooled his targets.
Check out the records at Century Tile Company if they got a
Where is
bad
it located?
Century Tile, well, you'd have to go to the lumber.
SENTRY?
624 Roosevelt, I think, is the company store.
In
The
Chicago.
office, where their offices are, yeah. I used to go to the one at Austin and Wellington.
Lucky for us, the tapes that Bob Motter recorded shed a lot of light on this monster's personalities. Bob has given those tapes to his son, Bob Motta Jr., who's a criminal defense attorney himself and the host of the Defense Diaries podcast. His newest podcast is called Buried Inside the John Wayne Gacy Investigation. Buried inside the John Wayne Gacy investigation. Bob, it's good to have you back on the program. Congratulations on the remastering. Those are clear as a bell. Those tapes are amazing. I could not wait to ask you, though, before anybody else, what your reaction is to this docudrama about John Wayne Gacy.
I thought it was fabulous. I thought Michael Chernus as Gacy was unbelievable. I messaged him right away and just said, look, man, you embodied what he was, and he really did. Out of anybody I've seen play that role, he just absolutely crushed it, and it was haunting. It really was.
Okay, I did not know this, but you watched the docudrama with your dad. So were you guys rating like how accurate it was, not only Gacy's performance, but then also the depiction of your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael Esprit, who played my father, we thought did a phenomenal role. And it was really kind of a surreal situation to be sitting there with my father watching this all play out. And we really appreciated the fact that they kind of dove into what we felt was the bigger story here, because we've all heard the Gacy kind of biography before. And this really got into a deeper part of the psychology of him. So we thought it was really, really well done.
So that's what I want to talk to you about, is this psychology, because I had no idea that he had this personality that he freely engaged with the cops, displaying like, I'm a good guy. I got to get back to work. How long is this going to take? This interview, And I want to play this one clip from your dad's recordings, the remastered ones, that have him talking to your dad about, marriage and divorce and, things like that. Meanwhile, there's 33 rotting bodies under his floorboards. So let's play that and talk on the other side.
One of the times we talked, John, we had determined that you were married on July 1st, 1972.
Yeah, that's right.
And that
3.5 years later.
February of 1976 is when the divorce proceedings began. So probably...
No, February 76 is when it became final.
So, the thing that I'm so fascinated by is the storytelling of the Gacy crimes as opposed to the gore. I always struggle with gore, and this particular docuseries on Peacock really took me into the moments, what the police were going through, what the victims' families were going through, and what Gacy was like through all of this, as opposed to the murders themselves. And I found it, for lack of a better word, I found it very classy the way the story was told. I wondered if you guys felt the same thing.
We did. And, my podcast, I think, is going to be a beautiful partner to this. I encourage people to watch the Peacock series. And then for the deeper dive, obviously, because they're limited with an 8-episode run in terms of what they can get to. But I thought it was wonderfully done. It was the first thing that I had seen in terms of visual where they actually tried to memorialize the victims in this case. And there were so many of them. I really, really appreciated that side of it, because that was something that we focused on so heavily in our podcast as well as the investigation. I mean, those were the two things that I really wanted to focus on. I wanted to know how the Chicago police couldn't do anything in 6 years that the Des Plaines Police Department was able to do in 10 days. I wanted to know how that happened.
Yeah.
And I thought that this doc did a beautiful job of laying that out.
Well, you and I aren't finished talking about this because the doc's still. I'm only on part 3, and so don't do the spoiler here. But also, I have a lot of other questions for you, just about the shaming of the victims and the dichotomy of how easily Gacy went between his personalities in these interviews. So, will you come back?
I'm here for it, Ashleigh. You know that.
Keep your calendar open, Bob Motta. Thank you. Say hi to your dad for me too.
I will.
Oh, so appreciate it. Okay, everybody, don't forget the Defense Diaries, and he's got his new podcast out as well that you got to check out. It is called, hold on a second, it's called Buried Inside the John Wayne Gacy Investigation. All right, coming up next. When it comes to museum heists and jewel thieves, I have always wondered what happens when they get the loot. How do they get rid of it? You can't just Google black market thieves, right? And you can't have the buyer Venmo you millions. So after the break, why yesterday's remarkable heist at the Louvre Museum in Paris may become a more common thing in the future, now that selling this kind of stuff just got so much easier. That's next. Tonight's What in the World segment is really a where in the world, as in where in the world are the untold millions of dollars worth of gems stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris in broad daylight? And more to the point, where in the world could they be headed? If you haven't heard, yesterday's brazen heist at the largest art museum in the world was an old-school, low-tech affair that should not have worked. The thieves were dressed as construction workers and drove a truck with an electric ladder right up to one of the busiest and most iconic tourist spots in Paris. They raised the ladder, they used power tools, cracked open a hole in the window of the second floor Apollo Gallery, and they didn't even bother to avoid the guards inside. They just threatened them. And the guards cleared the visitors out, and the thieves went to work cutting into 2 jewelry cases before slipping out through the broken window. Whole thing took all of 8 minutes. But what now? Another word for priceless is worthless. If whatever it is can't be sold, and you can't exactly pawn the crown jewels of France, and eBay's not an option. Time was you couldn't even move around large amounts of money without setting off big bank alarms, and governments as well were prying. But that little problem is largely gone now with the rise of crypto. We reached out today to a crypto forensic investigator to find out how crypto has changed this terrible game.
Cash is a physical item, whereas crypto can be done anywhere in the world to anyone. So there doesn't need to be a physical presence, and you don't need to worry about the issue of counterfeiting with crypto. It's fairly easy to distinguish real cryptocurrency from fake cryptocurrency.
The crooks are still on the win somewhere, but prosecutors believe that organized crime was involved and say that a megabucks private collector may have been the instigator. That would at least offer some hope that the pieces will stay intact rather than get broken up and sold in parts. As always, if you see something, say something, especially if you see a construction worker in a yellow vest at the Louvre. All right, still ahead tonight, an update in the case of the admitted teen rapist whose 78-year prison term was reduced. We brought you this story last week, and today, the, quote, youthful offender was supposed to be back in court, but magically, events intervened. After the break, you be the judge as to whether this day passes the smell test. Last week, we introduced you to Jesse Mack Butler, a now 18-year-old Oklahoma man who was charged back in February with raping, assaulting, and even strangling 2 of his girlfriends back in 2024. Lest you think it was a he said, she said, he videotaped himself strangling at least one of the girls. Though he was 17 at the time, he was charged as an adult. That is, until he wasn't. In July, he was reclassified as a youthful offender, at which point he pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 78 years in prison with a giant asterisk. If he completes 150 hours of community service, yikes, and complies with daily check-ins and counseling and doesn't break any more laws before he turns 19, which is in less than a year, his record will be wiped clean. No prison, no probation, no appearance on any sex offender registry, nothing for you or me or our daughters to avoid hiring him or, God forbid, dating him. Today, Jesse Butler was supposed to be back in court for a hearing to extend a protective order against him. But the hearing was canceled, and the reason given was a sewer line break that made the courthouse bathrooms unusable. Presumably, all of the canceled hearings are going to be rescheduled, and probably that's all there was to it, right? A plumbing issue. But you can bet we're going to keep our eyes on this one. We won't miss them. We'll keep watching. That is it for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Stick around. Cuomo starts now.